And boom, according to that, I am live. I am 15 minutes late. I'm sorry. We had home issues followed by technical issues, but I am here. I'm a bit late. Good to see you all. Hope that you're all doing well. Great to see so many people already rocked into the comments. We've already got Dan H, Aaron, Kubras Tenshi, Quint Ranked, Pig Venus. That's an interesting one. Who else we got? Shubus. Good to see you, Shubus. Ada Void. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Nice to see people rocking in. Again, apologies for being late. Some interesting topics to talk about this week. Some interesting events. One thing I should start off just as we let people rock in a little bit is, yeah, I am going to be out. I'll be in New Zealand next week, and in fact, yeah, I'll be flying to New Zealand, which means that probably time zone and connectivity and so on, I'm likely not be able. I'll have just arrived, so after a 24-hour flight, I'm flying to Singapore and then to New Zealand. So it's going to be pretty rough. So I'm not going to be doing a show next week. The week after that, I will be actually flying back to Japan from Singapore, and again, I'll be arriving back from an overnight flight. So I'm probably going to be out for 2 weeks, so apologies for that. Next week and the week after, I'm going to be on Twitter. I'm definitely going to take some videos in New Zealand. I'm going there for my grandmother's memorial. It's 12 months since her funeral, which no one could go to because the country was locked down. New Zealand was locked down. But it'll be my first time going to see my dad's house. It's the first time I actually had an immediate family member living in New Zealand since 1999. Since I left, I was the one who turned the lights out in New Zealand. So it's kind of nice to, now that Dad's got a house in New Zealand, I'm looking forward to staying there. And it's like kind of like a farm. It's quite big, so I'm kind of excited about just going and checking it out. So I'll definitely take some videos. I'll post some videos. I want to go for some runs, do stuff like that. Plus, it'll be just nice to reconnect with my country. It's been a long time, as well as to see relatives, of course. So it'll be a good trip. It'll be cold, and then I'm going to Singapore, where yeah, I'll be there for work, but I'll try to do some more runs and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I'll be on Twitter as I always am. I'll be probably watching a lot of movies and stuff when I'm traveling to keep up and whatever. I'll post reviews. But one positive review, I finished watching the first season of Only Murders in the Building. I heard so many people giving it great ratings, and it deserves the good ratings. Although I must admit, I was like into the first or second episode, and I was kind of like, yeah, I'm not so much a big Steve Martin fan. It just happens that there's a lot of movies that I really love that I realize after the fact, oh, that was a Steve Martin movie as well. He's just in a lot of like 80s movies in particular that I just really, really liked. LA Story is one of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah, it's probably hard to watch now. It's just very, very dated. I think it's like one of the first movies that Sarah Jessica Parker was ever in, actually. But yeah. Anyway, it's kind of, so I was looking forward to seeing him. I've never been much of a fan of Martin Short though, and honestly, I find his character hard to watch at times, particularly in the beginning. It took a while to warm up. It's not binge worthy like Narcos or Better Call Saul or anything like that, but it was fun, and I did get into it, and I'm starting to watch the second season, which I'll probably save for the flight now. But yeah, that was pretty good anyway, so that's something I can recommend. Anyway, let's get into the chat, see who's here, and yeah, got a few topics to go through tonight. Dan H in there early as always. Good to see. Hi, we've got Kerberos Tenshi, indeed. Sorry, I was late setting up. Like I said, just a few domestic things to run around. Squirrel alert, indeed. Dan H, halts light truck shipments as data scandal widens. Yeah, this is the sort of thing that you thought that only Mitsubishi Motors does, but having a Toyota affiliate, and to be clear, I think Hino was an acquired subsidiary. I don't think it was actually developed as a Toyota subsidiary, but definitely showing that they're up to the sort of Mitsubishi Motors type practices of hiding defects and so on. So yeah, not a good look for Toyota as a group, and taking a hard line, actually banning shipments of light trucks where they had the problems for a year until they get their stuff sorted out. So credit to Toyota for that. I mean, it's funny actually. Toyota, even the thing with like the phantom braking, issue on the Prius and stuff like that. It turned out that wasn't a thing. That was something that people sort of, when lawsuits and class actions were brought on that in the US, Toyota actually won it, but still, Toyota still apologized and recalled all the cars before that. That was their default was, yeah, we can do it better. We're sorry. Even though it turned out it wasn't, they apologize even when it's not their thing. That's the kind of high quality. I think that in the end of the day, it serves them well to hold themselves up to those kind of standards. So it's understandable that Hino Truck Company got its ass kicked over that. But yeah, Toyota announces a new battery program weeks after scandal. Looks like they're trying to paint over some bad news. Possibly, but as well, Toyota has the most battery patents, I think, of like any company in the world, certainly of automotive companies, including Tesla. Toyota has more battery patents than anyone else, and that's because, of course, they were so invested into battery technology relating to hybrids for a long time. And I kind of understand how Toyota feels a little bit hard done by now, that the world has kind of they've gone from being the environmental heroes with their hybrid cars to all of a sudden, one company in particular starts selling a lot of EVs, and all of a sudden, hybrids are evil almost, and Toyota, for wanting some time to convert over technology, it takes a long time for a big company like Toyota, feeling like, can't we just keep making hybrids for like 10 more years while we cut over to EVs, and being painted like these villains. I think that's a little bit harsh, actually, on Toyota. But yeah, it shows that they're not agile, and they care about making sure that they don't suddenly end the businesses of a lot of their parts suppliers. That hybrids obviously allow them to keep for the internal combustion parts. So yeah, I don't think it's purely cynical. I think that they're really genuinely struggling to and trying to cut over to being an EV company. I mean, look, they rolled out their first car so fast, the wheels literally were falling off the cars. That was not a good look for Toyota. So, I don't know. I think that they're struggling. I wouldn't write them off at all. But I must say, when you look at how companies like Ford are pivoting much more quickly, and they should have the same sort of problems, it's showing them up. But Japan and Toyota has a fast follower reputation, so I really hope that I'm rooting for them. I don't think I don't see them quite as the villains that they're being cast as. But yeah, the Hino news definitely looked very, very bad, and even by their own standards, that was a bad look. Well, I see there's more comments. Isuzu has production problems. Wow, Isuzu. I still think I've shared with you before the Donut Media sort of animated history of the Gentleman's Agreement, where they agreed to limit horsepower in cars in Japan in, I believe, the 1980s or 1990s. And Isuzu was one of the players in the meeting. And when they have the dialogue of what they imagine the meeting of the Gentleman's Agreement, where all the Japanese car manufacturers agreed to limit horsepower in their cars, Isuzu was sitting in the corner saying, "This is the greatest day of my life. Thanks, guys, for including me." And that's pretty much, I mean, I haven't seen an Isuzu. Maybe I've seen like a truck or something, but I haven't, it's kind of funny. I was more aware of Isuzu in New Zealand and Australia than I was here in Japan. That's another thing, you hardly see Mitsubishi cars in Japan either as well. You see them much more. You go to Thailand and half the cars are Mitsubishis, but in Japan you just don't see them anymore. So yeah, I guess they're now looking at China's BYD as a replacement. Yeah, Japanese logistics companies. This could be signs of Japan dying auto industry, slow to change over to more climate-friendly tech. It could be, and certainly I think it's. Well, look, manufacturing in Japan died a long time ago, and look, they are making cars and car parts in China for a long time now, and in the process of making car parts for other car companies, Chinese companies like BYD are starting to make decent cars, and not only are they making decent cars, but they're making the next gen. They've kind of skipped all the ICE internal combustion cars, and they're just skipping straight to making what looks like increasingly, surprisingly good quality electric cars. And I don't know, I think we could be 10 years away where just like Japanese cars in the 1980s, where you'll have this thing of people who believe that Chinese cars can't be good to suddenly realizing, oh, they're making better. And Japan will have taught China how to make them. And possibly even in Japan, we could be buying them. So yeah, I don't think that's, I think manufacturing as a whole is sort of coming to an end in Japan. I think Japan will still make design cars and engineer and oversee manufacturing. But yeah, who knows how long they can do that indeed. Minus Grill, I feel as if Kono is getting all of Suga's ideas and credit with the vaccination program and removal of the Neanderthal technology. Yes and no. Yes and no. Look, Suga, I think I've said before, I think Suga doesn't get enough credit for his ideas and policy initiatives and so on. There again, Kono's always been a bit of a maverick go-getter himself. Frankly, I think the vaccination thing was handed to him as a bit of a poison chalice. Because the original health minister just did such a bad job, and the health ministry did such a bad job that they got cut out of that whole thing completely. And it was kind of a suicide role for the health minister, and I think it was given to him as a kind of, can you turn this around? And look, he did. And I think the floppy disk and technology thing, you can attribute that to Suga, but it was also, I mean, look, Suga put him in charge of administrative reform, and he went to war on hankos and faxes and upset all the bureaucrats. And that was partly why Suga shuffled him, because he was upsetting the bureaucrats so much. But Suga obviously backed him, and he obviously wanted reform. I mean, I think Konotaro is the guy who kind of over delivered what Suga wanted. He kind of went a little bit nuts with it, but that's what he does. I mean, think of when Kono was foreign minister. I still think he always showed that he would take whatever portfolio he was given and generate it into a bit of a publicity machine for himself, by doing things, and including like with career relations and so on. I thought it was I was actually kind of entertained at the way that he danced around the problems that Japan had with Korea while he was a foreign minister. So yeah, I don't know. I think Kono has some of his own ideas, and like I say, he's one of the few politicians who seems to actually do things. Although I also think that sure, Suga was a relatively competent prime minister as well. Except, as I said, the thing about the big difference between Kono and Suga, wow, we are chasing squirrels like crazy, aren't we? But yeah, we can do this. The key, I think, Kishida's kind of the acid test of this. Some people might argue that the perfect prime minister, a 10 out of 10 prime minister, should have good ideas, good policy, good implementation, and good communication of those ideas. Suga, again, as things go, as LDP prime ministers go, had relatively, he wasn't particularly revolutionary, but he was pretty competent and surprisingly activist in terms of, I would have scored him highly on both ideas and implementation of ideas, including pushing through some unpopular ideas like the Olympics and so on. But this is the thing. I think communication of those ideas and leading the government and being the face and the accountable voice for all of those ideas is possibly the most important thing. At the end of the day, you can have no ideas if you have idea generating cabinet ministers, and you can back and lead and take responsibility for what they're doing for you. But if you can't communicate those ideas and win people over and get understanding and be a visible leader, then there's no point being a prime minister. Kishida has no ideas except for new capitalism, which he still hasn't defined, and is like a pure PR person, with nothing to say. So maybe he's the test of the opposite. But I do think that Suga, as much as I credit Suga as being an underrated PM, in the end of the day, he's never going to get higher than like a 7 because the most important function of PM, of being a good communicator, he was abysmal at. And Kono was good at that. So this is where Kono's got a chance. So anyway, there we go. Dan H, as usual, setting up some great questions and topics in the beginning that I attempted rapid fire to get through, but I don't think I did. But it doesn't matter. We're all having a good time. Indeed, Erin, I agree, funny name. Shubhas, glad that you made it. Tech issues indeed are resolved. Hope you're getting your coffee. I see you're on your coffee. That's a good thing. Boom, says Ben Duncan. Congrats, Ben. I'm sorry we couldn't catch up. I know we're going to catch up when you're back in Japan. And congrats, Ben Duncan. I know you've had a lot of good stuff going on after a few months of some hard work. So good stuff. To YY, boom, good to see you. One Johnson waving. Yoni, good to see you. Wow, from Taifuni, Okinawa. You picked a good time to go on an Okinawan vacation when they've got like a mega typhoon that's running over Okinawa and then like putting it in reverse and going back over Okinawa again. Yeah, I hope you got a discount. Sainted Sir, hiya. It's 9:55 a.m. in New York. Nice to have you. 9:55 a.m. in New York. Good to have you along here, although I know it's probably now actually 10 a.m. in New York. Kerber's Tenchi, Suzu builds mostly trucks and in the car market pickups and vans. Indeed, that's what I know Isuzu for in New Zealand is 4-wheel drives and trucks and utes and stuff like that. But you never see them here in Japan, possibly because it's Tokyo. But yeah, yes indeed. King of Kanto, sup indeed. Good to see you. We've got messages retracted. LOL, good hair, says Aaron, must be talking about me. We're caught up. So I'm going to dive into the topics because I started late and we've got half an hour to go. I might run a little bit over tonight, but yeah, let's jump into it. As usual, do what Kerber's Tenchi did and Sainted Sir and Dan H earlier. If you want to ask me a question, request a topic, or whatever, just say my name in the comments. In between each topic, I will come back, read through comments that are highlighted, and I'll take those on. So yes, indeed. I was actually just tweeting just before the show. I took a glance at Twitter and I saw Park-kun, famous Originally, I think he actually did like eikaiwa shows on NHK and stuff like that, and then kind of took off on his own right as sort of, first of all, a sort of variety show. I think he was a terrible comedian at first, but he kind of became a talento, and he now sort of acts as the voice of the United Nations on panels on random talk shows on Japanese TV. And he's lived in Japan for a long time. He's got very, very good Japanese. And he's quite well informed, and he's not Dave Spector, so all of those things are in his favor. Apparently, he generated some controversy on a TV show, TV Takura. I don't even remember what channel that's on. It's probably in here somewhere. But he, right now in Japan context, there's two big things happening at the moment that are sort of generating all of the talk show controversy. One is the never-ending pile on the Unification Church, and maybe deservedly so. I mean, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, and I've shared my views. They're terrible, but I don't see any principle-based piling on. They're literally just piling on that one church, and they're which has a lot of issues. But there are other new religions with very similar issues, including ripping off their followers and isolating people and so on, that are bigger and have more involvement in politics. But yet we're just going for that one, and we appear to be going for that one because the assassin of Abe wanted everyone to pile in on it, which leaves me, as I said before, like, isn't this kind of letting the terrorists win? And Japan has an unfortunate history of, including with the pre-war situation, which led Japan into a sort of fascist government one by one, that whenever you had a crazy right-wing drooling maniac assassinate a prime minister or some public figure before World War II, the public and media would kind of go, well, to do something so dramatic as that, he must have had a really good reason for it. He must be a patriot. And everyone kind of came around to supporting the assassinations after the fact. Japan has a history of this. And I don't think, I saw some people saying, oh, we have to consider this assassination in the context of the history of Japanese political assassinations. And I'm like, dude, that's like 100 years ago. But it's kind of happening in the sense that, yeah, a lot of people who, for various different, there is a large community of victims of the Unification Church who, yes, this is a person saying that, I don't endorse murder, but I understand what he went through. And those people are now getting a hearing in all sorts of media, but they're getting an uncritical hearing, and it's turning into a normal sort of a pile-in where people are almost forgetting. So is the principle here that religion shouldn't be involved in politics, or is the principle here that there shouldn't be religions that take advantage of people? But there's no principle involved. It's just that church, and for the weird reasons, like they're Korean, and like they secretly campaign for politicians and so on. And yes, there are multiple, but one in particular, much bigger religion that have all the same problems as Unification Church and are much more politically powerful, and no one's talking about that. In fact, the party that's most in bed with the bigger religion is actually one of the most outspoken, riding the wave of criticizing their competition in this church. In this church, and he's pointing out himself exactly what I think. Isn't this, remember, the guy who assassinated Abe was not from the Unification Church. He was against the Unification Church, and he's probably really happy that everyone's doing exactly what he wanted, which is to basically, take them down. And yeah, which isn't to say, look, to the extent that the Unification Church has done tons of horrible, bad things, yeah, they deserve, all the stuff that's coming. But at the same time, it's taking on that characteristic of a Japanese pile-on where, when there's a scandal on someone, it's like you almost stop thinking about what's actually wrong. And doing everything in an objective sort of a way. And that's how this feels. And I agree with him on that, and the fact that this is being done, if this was being done across the board, then you could say it's not doing anything specifically just because of this assassin. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But the fact it's all just being focused on this one religious group is basically doing, it's like, it's like the Oklahoma City bombing happens, and it causes, the politicians in public to think, yeah, maybe there really is something wrong with the FBI. Maybe they should have handled. And look, there's lots of criticism of Waco, of course, in political, but nobody says that, I don't think it caused a whole reconsideration or, open season on the FBI after the Oklahoma City bombing, right? Well, that's a little bit what this is like. It's like the whole public and media and press says, you know what? Yeah, the FBI, they suck. I mean, that's basically kind of what's happening here. And Park Kun saying that's weird, and I agree with that. The second thing that he pointed out is that everybody is like complaining. I mean, right now it's actually majority of public polls show just over 50% of people are against there being a state funeral for Abe. You know, something like 30% of people don't really care, but about 50 something percent are against generally. And there are large, loud protests, and you know they're the same sort of activists, large protest groups that have been protesting Abe for years for all sorts of reasons. And now, of course, you know Abe was, particularly to the far left in Japan, some version of the Antichrist. And it was interesting to me when Abe first became prime minister that their perspective of Abe became the perspective. They were very effective at getting international journalists to listen to them as the inside scoop on him, and I think it affected the portrayal of Abe, which I think is quasi hysterical. I mean, yes, he's a far right. He has very far right conservative views that alarm far left people in Japan. But I also think, as I've said before, I thought that the way that he carried out his prime ministership was not reflective of his own personal views in a lot of cases. That said, I mean, what they're saying now is how can you be doing a state funeral when you still haven't had a resolution over the cherry blossom viewing party where they were handing out bribes to supporters, or the Moritomo Gakuen scandal where he pressured, it appears, the scandal appears to be that he may or have directly or indirectly forced the Osaka city government to hand over land to an extreme right-wing private school for almost free that his wife was on the board of. You know, that led to, when there was an investigation, it led to the pressured city worker who went along with the political pressure to hand over, to value the land at next to nothing, to commit suicide. Which indirectly looks like a murder. So there are some big scandals and some dark clouds hanging over Abe, but he was never caught on any of these. He went out after the longest tenure of PM of anybody due to illness, and then was assassinated. And Park Geun says again, if you don't do a state funeral for this, when would you do a state funeral? Like, you know, the longest serving prime minister. Just the fact that, you know, he had relations with so many international leaders that expect to come and pay their respects in Japan, and the government has to put something on for that. To me, it's kind of a no-brainer that, you know, in a way, this shouldn't be a partisan issue, doing a state funeral. But of course, what everyone is saying is that, yeah, isn't doing a state funeral, one, free advertising for the LDP ahead of elections, and two, isn't it trying to beatify his legacy and wipe over all the scandals and so on, which is still unresolved and needs to be worked out? And isn't this going to help brush all that under the rug and do the LDP a big favor? So, and kind of yes, but at the same time, I mean, if you politicize an assassinated, longer-serving PM's like funeral, what can you do? There's only been one precedent of a state funeral in Japan. This is another reason why there's opposition to it in Japan. It was Yoshida, the post-war prime minister, is the only person who got a state funeral. And even then, it was half paid for by the LDP because it was recognized that the LDP would benefit from it. And this is going to be a much bigger funeral than that by the sounds of it. But I do think from Kishida's perspective, I think it's people who dislike Abe really dislike him. I think the majority of opposition, however, to the funeral, the 50%, I think 10% of that 50% is the people who just like hate Abe and refuse to acknowledge anything, including a state funeral, to sort of improve his image. But I think the other 40% are just people like who oppose the Olympics and just don't want their taxes to be wasted. Like, you know, people's the purchasing power of wages is going down, prices are going up, taxes are going up, the government's heavily in debt. Why are we wasting money on a parade for a state funeral when Japan doesn't do state funerals? It's not done one in like 70 years. To someone from America, where they do state funerals more often, I mean, they even pay public money, for Kobe Bryant, for example. So America seems to be willing to do tax-funded, funerals at the drop of a hat, and it's not particularly controversial. But I'm kind of that view anyway, that why not pay? I mean, the thing is, if Japan's left cannot acknowledge that for all of Abe's many, many flaws and however much they hated him politically, that he was still a successful international statesman to some measure, and certainly is going to become a historical figure. If you can't acknowledge that, and what do they have to offer? I mean, the thing is, for all of the terrible, for all of the dislikable stuff about Abe, the left has never been able to offer an alternative. So, they've never been able to convince anyone throughout all of this. In fact, even after Abe resigned and Suga was running in the elections, the left was still saying that, we're still campaigning against Abe. because they saw Suga as just like someone carrying on what Abe was doing, which I think was selling Suga short a little bit, but it just shows how kind of hysterically obsessed they are with him a little bit, for all of the bad things that were there. And yeah, so in the midst of this rage at waste of taxes and political hatred of Abe and this everyone agrees we should all be piling in on that right wing strange Korean cult that's manipulating the LDP and politicians. And Park Geun-hye's like, well, why are we just, isn't this just silly? Aren't we just letting the terrorists win by piling in so directly because of the assassination on this cult and without any thought to principle? And, if we don't do a state funeral now, when would we? And I agree with Park Geun 100% on both of those. The backlash, he's going to get cancelled for that. I'm fortunately not popular enough to be cancelled. Yeah, first you have to be, first you actually have to have a profile in order to be cancelled. So I'm relying on that. But yeah, he's right. I mean, I would support a crackdown on UC if it was a crackdown on all things like UC. But it's not, and they won't. They're not going to crack down on Komeito. They're not going to crack down on that crazy Kofuku, Jitsugen, to, or all the other, even nuttier religions that are involved in politics. And again, I think I'm not a fan of Abe, but I think it's totally normal that you would do that. Any country would do a state funeral in the circumstances. I think that and I don't want to see taxes wasted either, and I think they should go small on it. But I think the vitriol over both of things at the moment, Park Geun-hye's going to get it bad. He's going to get cancelled over this, but he's right. Wow, that was 15 minutes on one story. That's okay. That's okay. I see there's more people here in the chat. Believe in yourself. Good to see you in here. Japan government is just a mess, says Aaron. I kind of agree with you. But I might be wrong about the funds. The funds are definitely part of it, but the most vitriolic opposition to the funeral is definitely from just the people who dislike him. But yeah, going through Odie Jr., boom, good to have you in here. Auntie Liana in Yokohama, expensive squid there. Yeah, we're getting to the expensive squid. That's like one of the highlights of the show. I've got a few rants coming up, actually. Well, yeah, kind of. I've got a rant about the ice cream, but we'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, we've got Auntie Liana, Yokohama. We've got Tawaiwai. Sadiq, good to see you, Sadiq. Our man from Florida. Hello from Miami. I actually had dinner, lunch on Friday with someone from Miami. And I was like, yeah, I want to go to Miami. Jealous that you're there. Kobros Tenshi, Tawaiwa, I think actually had a story on that before, like months ago. Okay, I don't know if I did. Dan H, do I know if any of the current LDP MPs have any links with the student riots in the 60s and former revolutionaries? Everybody had links to the student riots in the 1960s. I mean, given that they're all of the right age, everybody in that time who's involved in politics right now was either in the student dormitories barricaded or was in the right-wing construction company sort of security guard thugs that were tearing them down and setting them on fire. I mean, this is, again, I'm pretty sure none of the LDP members would have been inside of the dormitories. That's where the Red Army got founded. But a lot of them take pride in quietly saying that they were outside with baseball bats, wearing security guard uniforms. I don't know the specifics of that, but yeah, of which were involved. But the dynamics, certainly if you've got any politicians like over, I guess now 70 years old, or maybe in their 60s, yeah, really, no, in fact, they'd have to be older than their 70s, but pretty much everyone involved in politics now was involved in some way at those times. I mean, if they're like aristocratic LDP types, they were probably handing over money, bundles of cash to the right-wing groups and the security guards and so on that were being the thugs that were fighting the students, but they were all involved at that time, is my understanding. So in that sense, former revolutionaries, by revolutionaries, that's something more associated with the left, and the left in Japan, they were all involved in that again. And this is the main paint that's used, the brush that's used to discredit all of the elderly far left-wing people, is that they often have ties to the Red Army, and it's various insane, murderous, self-destructing factions. But yeah, those won't be in the LDP, but that's the thing. Next story, I saw this the other day. So, like, when the seasons change here, when it switches over to September 1st and it becomes autumn or fall, if that's your thing, when it becomes autumn in Japan, I mean, it's still like 34 degrees. It still is hot. I'm still pouring sweat. Today it was like 32 degrees and humid and horrible. But they immediately, I mean, if there was chocolate and there wasn't chocolate, which in itself just makes me angry, all the sour drinks, they stopped stocking them in the vending machine. So I'm still getting the premium lemon Fanta from vending machines where it's available because I know they're not going to restock it. Basically, everything sour and everything minty and refreshing is being taken off the shelves. But from September 1, regardless of the weather, regardless of whether it feels anything like autumn yet, they start putting autumn stuff in. And one other point is that within autumn, Halloween, October, you know, end of October celebration, somehow it seems to have gotten bigger to me than Christmas in Japan. And it's weird. It's just like pumpkin, freaking everything, all over the place. And Christmas in its own way, I suppose, has become like a cosplaying evening and date evening or something. It's gotten no, but actually, Halloween's become this big sort of party night in Japan. And from September 1st, I see that we had no chocolate palm ice creams, but immediately they have caramel pumpkin. And I don't know. I mean, like I like pumpkin soup and I like roast pumpkins. I'm not anti-pumpkin. But I'm pumpkin. The right pumpkin in the right place in the right circumstances, okay. But like pumpkin spice, like sprinkles on coffee, and like just pumpkin, like just randomly added to chocolate, and randomly added to ice cream, just like as a seasonal sale thing. It tastes like plastic. I mean, it tastes like I had Star Wars figures when I was young enough to accidentally eat them, so I know what it tastes like. And yeah, it tastes like that's what pumpkin sprinkles taste like. And the fact that I had to suffer through one of the hottest summers in Tokyo ever without adequate chocolate to get through. I mean, last year I had chocolate Pockies, there was a Country Mam, there's mint cranky, there's all these ways that you can get through the summer. And this year there was no respite. There was just, and then at the end of it, they hold it back from us. And then while we're still sweating and suffering and we're barely even recovered, they slap us in the face with caramel pumpkin ice cream. I mean, people talking about last year being the worst year ever. Well, in its own way, people are being quieter this year, but a year without adequate chocolate and just being hit with pumpkin like in September, I'm upset. I mean, seriously, what kind of pumpkins could this have come from? It's September 1st. They would be like rotting. They'd be open, rotting. I mean, they're probably not even real. I mean, seriously, they're probably melting down Star Wars figures and calling it pumpkin and sprinkling because it tastes the same. It doesn't make sense. So I saw this and I was, I was annoyed. Oh, in fact, yes, you can see my reaction. JFC. I see people using JFC lately, and it summed up how I felt about seeing this ice cream, and I just felt the need to share. I'm not anti-pumpkin. Well, I mean, like I say, I can like a pumpkin as much as the next person, but don't slap me in the face with it, right? Don't sprinkle it in my coffee. Plenty of things I enjoy that I don't want sprinkled in my coffee. Okay, so and pumpkin is definitely one of those things. Aaron, I think you understand me perfectly. So there we go. It's cheaper. I can do stir fry. Yeah. Look, actually, curry soup, stir fry pumpkin, all for that. In fact, actually, the Nimono pumpkin that they sell at the supermarket, I love that stuff, right? Like pumpkin as pumpkin is good, but like pumpkin as a sprinkle or a condiment or like an ice cream flavor, it's just like, no, somebody's just gotten too crazy with the pumpkin, and they need to stop. They need to stop, and they need to bring back chocolate because we're not done. Okay, seriously. So just had to get that off my chest. Next one, enormous squid. So you remember I talked about this giant squid when this came out last year. The controversial, when the government handed out special funds to various local governments that had suffered huge financial losses over lack of loss of tourism, loss of services, and so on. People losing jobs and needing to hand out local funds for COVID relief. And when they handed all this money over to the city of Noto in Western Japan, Noto infamously decided to spend $230,000 on just making a big statue of a squid in a park with their COVID relief funds. And this was cited immediately as a sign of local governments just slapping the government in the face with a caramel pumpkin ice cream. And taking the piss, and there was outrage on this on the news. And you know what I said? I said on the show last year, if I could be bothered editing, I'd point up and say, see my video there where you can see me saying, go for it, Noto. That squid is awesome. That's like a real life giant squid. It is awesome. And while I have no immediate plans to visit Noto, if I was within easy visiting distance, I would visit to go and see that awesome, enormous squid. And I would absolutely take photos. I think that is awesome. And why not, right? I mean, and the fact that it generated so much publicity, I mean, it's probably got to be good. 12 months on, it turns out that $240,000, statue of a squid, that wasting of public funds, has generated an estimated $6.4 million in economic benefits from attracted tourism and related marketing. So, Nota, that's exactly thinking outside of the box. I mean, seriously, albino masks or a freaking enormous squid statue. Noto knows what's up, right? They took that and they made money out of it. It's a giant squid, and congratulations. Sorry, got itchy into my nose here. It's happens when I get too excited and I talk too much. So yeah, anyway, Noto squid, awesome, and well done there. Something I can see, Dan H, a distracting thing there about Ukrainian women. Oh, this is Gashi. I have no time to even try to understand anything about Gashi. He's just from an insane, I mean, you talk about, antisocial structures, and everyone's looking at the Unification Church, and really that party that he is a member of is just weird. And yes, so if that's what you're talking about, I have no interest in that particular one. What I do have an interest in is more outrage. Konotaro, the epitome of being given, being told to run up to the shops and buy a stick of gum. And somehow turns that into a self-promoting political campaign. When he was the minister for administrative reform, and he declared war on Hankos, and it became a thing. Like, Hanko lobby groups were getting outraged and lobbying the Suga that he was going too far. Bureaucrats were saying that he's messing everything up. And now that he's in charge of the digital agency, and he's learned that there's still extensive use of floppy disk technology in government, and the reason for it, and this is something I work with to some extent, Japanese laws are wonderful in the sense that they are like stereo manuals. Like in Western countries, like in America or Britain or New Zealand or Australia that use common law, generally speaking, legislators will actually write the laws themselves. They'll often be lawyers making, maybe not in America, but in a lot of countries, they'll actually write laws. And what they'll do is they'll write that, everybody should stop using floppy disks, and they'll leave the administration of that law up to the various agencies that will, maybe have departmental manuals or whatever, but they'll deal with things on a case-by-case basis. And if something becomes controversial, they'll let a court fill in the gaps. So whenever you want to figure out, hey, can I use a floppy disk for this or not, and you go to a lawyer for that, it's a pain for the lawyer. Because you read the law and it'll be kind of vague, and then you'll have to look up case law and try to figure out what all the interpretations were and where were all the controversies. In Japan, they don't do it that way. In Japan, the bureaucrats write the laws to begin with, and they write them from the bottom up. They write them basically as a complete manual of everything that could ever possibly happen, and they're often over prescriptive. But what's great from a lawyer perspective is I never have to search cases in Japan. You start the law, which says, there will be a law on how you can transfer data. And then you'll have the enforcement the enforcement ordinance, and then the regulations, and then the guidance, and then the policies, and it's all stacked like a big pyramid. And you can just follow it through sequentially, like going through, sort of a file folder, and you can always find an answer for any question. The downside of this is that when you write those laws in that level of detail in the 1980s and 1990s, it means that those laws themselves become, they prevent people from handling problems flexibly and updating for things like technology. There are 1,900 regulations, rules, laws in Japan that are legislated that require the use of floppy disks for certain types of, government data handling and operations. And they cite the existence of those regulations requiring them to use floppy disks as a reason that they can't use the internet, for example, for sharing information or collecting information or improving efficiency of their systems. In fact, it's written there. So Japan still has 1,900 provisions in its laws requiring data to be submitted on floppy disks and other storage media. Oh, that's right. It can also be USB. Some of the more progressive ones rewrote the laws to say you could use USB sticks. And Taro Kono was saying that, the government's trying to digitize. The government's trying to allow services to be offered over the internet and allow people to upload photos and, submit through forms and so on. And there are much more efficient ways to do it. And these laws that are overly prescriptive are, inhibiting that. And of course, it becomes an excuse for these departments to never upgrade their IT and to be running on systems that can still use these old sort of drives and these old sort of systems, because the systems themselves are often also legislated. And it just becomes a big excuse for IT companies to keep their government customers locked in using outdated technology without their tech companies needing to ever update their skills. And the government departments never being able to improve their systems. As digital minister, which they just made Taro Kono, he is like, okay, we are going to get rid of all of these laws that require the use of outdated technology, starting with floppy disks. And everyone's freaking out. But the fact that this even exists and the fact that he's highlighting this, it's kind of obvious that the job of the digital minister is to digitize government, but he is the kind of guy who would say, instead of like step by step looking for opportunities to increase digitization of government, he is finding, okay, we are going to ban floppy disks. And he's taking his role, but it's gotten international news and it's the right thing to do. And it's a bit of a parade. Honestly, in the end of the day, of all the problems of digitizing public services in Japan, getting rid of floppy disks is like a long way down the list, but it's an easy to highlight. It's kind of a symbol of all of the changes that need to be done, and it establishes his authority. So this is where I think he's a much more astute politician than Suga ever was. He knows how to identify an easy to grasp, way to sell a policy that Japan's government IT is outdated. And rather than debating behind closed doors with bureaucrats who don't want to change anything, he's going to the public with the easiest to make argument that to back him, that people should empower him to allow him to change everything, with the most ridiculous examples that exist. And he's making a public spectacle out of it. And this is kind of, honestly, you could put him in charge of collecting garbage and he would do the same thing. He would pick something and he would do the same. And he's right, and it's great. And this is what I like about Taro Kono, Quinn Rankid and all those old systems of security risk. Some people would say, ironically, if you wanted to hack, the fact that they're not connected to the internet and the fact that you actually need old floppy disk, where they're very, very hard to get nowadays, in a way becomes perversely a form of security. But of course, how many cases have there been in the news of government workers falling asleep drunk on trains where they've dropped a USB drive that contained the personal data of thousands of citizens, for example? It is a security risk in that regard, and it's been proven to be so. And it's holding back. It just basically increased cost of government. It makes services terrible. It means that for so many things, particularly if you're living in rural areas, for basic things that in most countries are now done over the internet, you are required to travel in person and fill out physical forms and stamp them and hand over floppy disks and all kinds of things. Even the collection of COVID data and whatever was required by fax, by law, for example, and getting rid of that made a lot of sense. Go, seriously. I mean, in the end of the day, there are much bigger problems than floppy disks in the digitization of the Japanese government, but to the extent this gives him the momentum and the authority to overhaul everything, it's a smart move. Dan H., you were talking about Rakuten, an out-of-touch founder of a failing IT business, which only knew how to take investors' money without returns and constantly rebranding and not making money. Well, yeah, they had a big outage on their mobile service today. Rakuten, actually, I don't know. I mean, I don't see it as being quite that bad. They had they were ahead of Amazon until a few years ago. They're still quite a successful online shopping portal, but yeah, they do have some issues indeed. I see. And I'm sorry, I wasn't reading that closely enough. So you're talking about Mikitani, and Mikitani is a colorful character. I don't know a lot about him, but I think he was living in Singapore for a time to avoid capital gains tax, which is very high in Japan, and various other things. But yeah. Oh, look at all of those topics. Damn. Okay, I'm going to do rapid fire after we do this. Airplanes still run on data from floppy disks as well, says Cobra Tenchi. I did not know that. That is alarming, although not surprising. I guess, often a lot of airplanes that are flying now, 747s is 70s technology. The space shuttle ran on, 128K RAM, basically Apple IIe's. It ran on 4 Apple IIe's running in serial, I think, or they were running as backups to one another. So absolutely. Yeah, okay, let's speed it up. So yeah, again, more exposés about how the Unification Church works and how, politicians would basically get lots of donations for their campaigns, and Unification Church would offer their members as people to help as free campaign staff, to help politicians or whatever. Komeito and the religion that backs them does exactly the same thing. So again, terrible, outrageous, but talk about the principle, not about the church. I mean, yeah, the Unification Church does it as well. It also seems increasingly clear, by the way, that the family values committees that popped up, including one committee within the LDP that actually put out a statement saying that LGBTQ is mental illness. This was basically lifted directly. This was written by Unification Church lobbyists that handed these materials to this Japanese sort of social conservative committee within the LDP. And now they're all very embarrassed to discover that's where it came from, which is actually good in a way. It actually totally removes the people, the very few people who are. And I always said it was strange that there were Japanese social conservatives opposing LGBT rights, like nationwide recognition of LGBTQ marriage, for example. Given Japan's history of being totally not caring about, frankly, sexual orientation of anybody, famous people in history and literature and so on in Japan were totally fine going in any direction that was convenient at the time. Japan's never had this sort of Christian religious, even in Christianity, it's weird to me, but this idea that it's an important thing. So, it's very characteristic of Christian conservatives to be up in arms about this. And it was weird that there was a social conservative arm of the LDP that was up in arms about this. But it turns out, no, that was being fed to them by this extreme right-wing Korean cult. And now they're very embarrassed about it and they're stopping. But the point is, this, all the parties do this with other religions as well. To me, it's the principle rather than the actual specific party. Although, it's kind of good that it's coming out and it's causing those particular things to backfire. Another thing I mentioned is that, yes, the Japanese government is looking for 10 designated special tourism zones to target tourists who spend roughly, well, actually now, on the current exchange rate, $7,400 on normal times, $10,000 on a trip, not including the airfare. Some people asked about that. So they're looking for ways to just attract rich tourists who spend lots of money, which for most European, well, for people who I know, you generally backpack, spend as little as possible, buy a couple of T-shirts and go home. So they weren't looking for me as a tourist, but they're looking for basically probably wealthy. And they're talking about setting up casinos and resorts with brands and so on to sell to them as a way to sort of try to get more money out of each tourist, which again is just so they're doing this in the midst of the country still being locked out to tourists effectively, even with the tour system, which I think we're going to come to in a moment. But, again, Japan's soft power came from having large numbers of people just coming and, not being steered in. Singapore and Korea did focus on steering rich tourists into casinos, and I don't think that did anything good for their image or even their bottom line, frankly. So again, it just shows that they're just clueless on tourism, if you ask me. Rapid antigen tests, authorized rapid antigen tests are about to be available online. In fact, I think they started selling them. They're more expensive than the dodgy ones like the one that I bought, but they weren't authorized to be sold online. They were actually prohibited by law. Again, these laws that are over-prescriptive. This was another case. They weren't authorized to be sold online until just now. They've just freed that up, so that's a good step. The Japanese government, when they finally realized that tourists are not coming back because of the requirement of having a minder tour guide watching everybody and making sure they're not going off anywhere or violating unwritten COVID rules, they've eased back by saying, yes, you still have to be on a tour with a schedule being controlled by a tour company that's monitoring where they go and is responsible if anybody catches COVID. But the tour guide doesn't have to come and watch you every step of the way. So come millions of people, please. And of course, that's not what's happening. Taro Kono actually said on Twitter that he thinks they'll go back to the visa waiver system where individual normal tourism will be able to probably resume hopefully around the end of the year. It's hard to say at the moment, but he sees that this being a baby step on the way back to that. But the system at the moment is still just bizarre that you have to apply for a special tourist visa. You have to be attached to a tour on a schedule. You've got no freedom of movement. and you're still basically monitored indirectly, if not directly, by to a company. It's still weird. I mean, the government is, or Japan Rail is setting up another unlimited Japan Rail Pass. I thought that they always had a Japan Rail Pass, by the way, but there's a special East Japan only, not West Japan. This is to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Japan Rail. And this will allow you all you can ride Shinkansen deal, which would be great if there were actual tourists in Japan. So yeah, it will be 22,150 yen, $160 to basically have unlimited high-speed rail access all over the East Japan. This would be awesome if there were actual tourists here, so that is great, but a shame. The yen broke 140 yen per dollar, the lowest it's gone since 1998, which was just before when I came to Japan. And yeah, interesting here. Some people, I made a comment about this, that some people are blaming, of course, I mean, the war in Ukraine, international inflation, and so on, as well as the inflation in the US and the high interest rates being generated by the Fed, are certainly all reasons that money is going over to being taken out of Japan and being sent over to the US, where it can generate more interest. But at the same time, the Japanese government for 20 years now has been just printing money nonstop and has basically reduced interest rates to near zero, trying to generate inflation, and trying to increase wages. And in spite of the government like harassing companies to try to increase wages, they've never complied. And the government just keeps that's all that they can do. They're just printing money and keeping interest rates at zero, and they can't stop printing money and increasing interest rates until you start to get wage inflation, which hasn't happened in 20 years. And they can't lower the interest rates anymore, and they can't print money faster than they are. But those things are also contributing to the yen losing its value at the moment. So basically, you could say it's due to external shocks, but it's also due to the Bank of Japan just being out of ideas and not having any idea how it's going to be able to start the economy again. And it's going to feed into this yen collapse at the moment, which again, if you were a tourist coming from outside of Japan into Japan, everything in Japan is on a 30% sale now, including the all-you-can-ride Shinkansen deal. And again, you could be improving the value of the yen if you let tourists in, but the government doesn't want to do that yet. So it's all just very self-defeating at the moment. Next story, I love this one. A woman apparently was reporting she saw a monkey. And, monkeys can be dangerous. They have rabies. They attack people. So she went to the monkey control department in Fujikawa Station in Fujikawa City in Shizuoka Prefecture, Fuji City in Shizuoka Prefecture. She reported to the monkey controllers, "I saw a monkey. Monkey!" She shouted at them, and they reacted by loading a tranquilizer dart into a gun, which accidentally fired and shot the lady. So essentially, a lady who reported seeing a monkey to the monkey control people was shot with a monkey tranquilizer dart and was knocked out for 2 hours. Not by all accounts, it appears she was shot accidentally. They were not aiming at her. They didn't mistake her. They didn't think it was a monkey trying to turn itself in. I mean, again, I'm trying to visualize how this would happen, that a woman who is reporting seeing a monkey is shot herself by the monkey control people. It's a bit like what you hear about in the US about people calling the police and then being shot by them, but different. Yeah, certainly awkward. I don't know how I would explain that the shooter or the person being shot. It's just a bad situation all around. I guess the rule is if you see a monkey, I think the advice here is don't make eye contact and walk away. And possibly don't call the monkey police because you might just get shot. I was walking around the Gajoin Hotel. That's where I met my friend from Miami the other day, and I saw this fella. And it's a skinny. The consensus on the internet is that is a tanuki. First time I've seen a tanuki walking around in Tokyo. You see them out in the countryside, but yeah, and that was awesome. I saw that, and then like a day later, another tanuki was seen in Shinjuku Station. Can I show that? Walking around in Shinjuku Station. So like tanuki, which are basically a kind of raccoon dog, kind of civet, kind of possum kind of hybrid that are indigenous to Japan. There are non-indigenous. There are actual raccoons, araiguma, and there are hakubishin, which are civets from Indonesia that are like invasive species all over the place, and you see them increasingly in Tokyo. But tanuki are indigenous, and they are famous for having enormous personalities. Yeah, they are. I've never seen one in Tokyo, so I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, and more news about the tour requirements being dropped, and that is it. That is all the stories for tonight. So I think I'm getting in just under an hour, even though I'm over. But yes, do those things carry rabies? Yeah, they probably carry lots of bad things, and they should be. And the one I saw was pretty skinny. Again, when I saw a civet, it just ran away, right? But this one, he looked kind of skittish, but I took like 4 or 5 photos like that. He was right beside me. Cute fellow as well. I was like, yeah, I dig Tanukis. Tanukis are cool, but definitely not where he should be in the middle of Meguro where I saw him. So yeah, I hope he got out okay. Uh, the monkey gave a side glance. Better you than me, lady. I'll bet that's what the monkey said. I mean, this whole thing looks like it could have been framed by the monkey. Cobra's Tenshi. Probably the safety was off in the dark gun and they handled it badly. No, it certainly isn't. I don't think they shot her on purpose. Although, we'll have to see the results of the investigation. So yeah, Atomic Tom, good to see you and everybody else. If there's anyone I didn't say hello to, I'm sorry if I didn't do that, but thank you for keeping me company. I ended up having to race through this a little bit, but there's been interesting things happening this week. As I said in the start of the show, I will be traveling the next 2 weeks, so I'm probably not going to be able to do a show for 3 weeks. I will be active on Twitter. I will take some videos when I'm in New Zealand. I'll be flying to New Zealand next weekend. I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll be in Singapore the week after that. I'll probably post some photos and some videos. But yeah, don't expect a live show for 3 weeks. So apologies for that. I'll be traveling for a bit. I'll be probably very tired from all of that. But I do hope you all stay well. The good news with coronavirus, by the way, in the Tokyo at the moment, down to 9,600 cases today, which is 6,000 less than this time last week. So cases are now really, the wave seems to be ending. I don't think it's the end of coronavirus at all. Of course, this was the 7th wave. We're going to have another one, but it's nice that they're coming down and people can relax a bit again. But yeah, Quinn Rankid points out most animals try to avoid humans. If they're not, it can be a sign of rabies. Indeed. Yeah, although you have animals which are used to being around people and don't have any fear, like crows and magpies in New Zealand, and like the monkeys you get in Japan, and but yeah, just generally speaking, with wild animals, you don't want to go and touch them anyway. They even if they're not got rabies, they probably got other things, but and leave them alone, right? But still, adorable, right? I still like that fellow. Atomic Tom, will you see me jogging on Instagram? Yes, you will. In fact, I ran around the palace yesterday and I videoed the whole thing, and I got quite a good video, which I'm probably going to post this week. I've got a whole lot of running videos queued up that they'll just go up automatically every Wednesday, but I'll probably put the palace one up because it's a particularly good one. So you'll see that this week. I will still be doing that. But yeah, and I'll also do some runs probably in New Zealand and Singapore just because it's nice to have some different scenery. Kubra Senshi, wildlife in big cities, unnoticed, it pretty normal. I've seen boars, deer, foxes in big cities. Raccoons are pretty common. Yeah, in Japan, you definitely get all of those, even bears sometimes. But Tokyo, you don't really get them that much. So, but you still get news stories. There was a monkey running around the other week. But first time I've seen a tanuki, so pretty cool. I will enjoy New Zealand. Thank you for that, EDIR. Good to see you. And have a nice trip, and I will be back soon. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. Remember to stay cool, take care, and I'll see you all soon. And also, heads up randomly, I'm thinking if coronavirus does ease back, and particularly when tourism and so on eases up a little bit, maybe around the end of the year, I want to do a kind of a tweet up, meetup thing in Japan for people in Japan. It'd be kind of cool to actually see some people for the first time in a while. So I'm thinking about this anyway. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you're interested in that. And follow me on Twitter. And yeah. Anyway, have a good one, everybody. Have a good week. Boom. Peace. End stream. Boom. Whoa.